Welcome back to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. Jack Stern and Spencer Michaelis with you from Brewer Fanatic. Got a lot of action to recap this week. The Brewers wrapping up a road trip in Oakland for their final series ever at the Coliseum, and then returning home for a quick 3-game set with the Giants before they hop back on the road for another series. And then we'll finally have a little bit more normalcy in the schedule as they have a little bit of a longer homestand coming up after that. But before we jump into the weekend review, Spencer, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Doing well. Just had a fantasy football draft, so that was fun. Yahoo graded it an A+, so not to brag, but Yahoo's always right. No, I'm probably going to come in last because of that. But no, it was good and been a fun week. I wasn't able to watch the Brewer game yesterday, but for the most part, been able to catch most of these games. So excited to talk about it. How about you, Jack?
I'm doing swell. My question based off of what you just said, though, is related to fantasy sports. I haven't played fantasy sports in probably 5 years now at this point. I don't know how people have time for this. I've tried to do it in the past and I can never stick with it.
Yeah.
Is it same deal for you? Like, how do you find time for this?
I'm not the greatest at keeping up with it.
Okay.
I didn't even prep much for these drafts or anything. I used to be so into it during college, but now it's just I'm in the same leagues I've been in forever, so I just keep doing it, but it's not exactly something I'm as into as I used to be, but it's still fun.
Okay. Well, as long as you're having a good time, I guess that's all that matters. So everyone can rejoice that Spencer's having fun, but we're going to have a lot of fun over the next 90 minutes here. I said 90 minutes, so now we have to stick to that and keep it to 90
We're going to
minutes.
do our best.
We'll do our best. We'll start with the series in Oakland. As I mentioned, the Brewers heading out there for their final series at the Coliseum before the A's move to Sacramento for the next few years. The Brewers taking the first 2 games in this series. They came up just short of a sweep in game 3, but we'll dive into all of that action right now. Game 1, a pretty heavily Brewers showing in this one, 11-3 the final. Milwaukee putting up 5 of those runs in the second inning. Rhys Hoskins and Joey Ortiz hitting back-to-back home runs. That Hoskins shot was a 3-run to get that scoring started. And then as the inning continued, Miguel Andujar out in left field missed playing a Jackson Chourio single that was hit almost right at him. He had to range a little bit for it, but a pretty routine play out there, and it just got past him. That allows Andrew Monasterio to score and keeps the inning going. Then when we get to the 4th inning, once again, Chourio's right in the middle of the action. He hits an RBI double in the 4th and then would come around to score on a Blake Perkins infield single that was up the middle, knocked down by the second baseman, but the bobble allowed Chourio to take that extra base and come home. Aaron Savali got the ball in this one, and not a very long outing for him, despite some of the run support that he got. Only 4 innings for him, 4 hits allowed, 3 earned runs, 3 strikeouts. But the story in this one was a couple of different things. The main one, though, was just the walks, and a lot of it came back to the fastball command, the fastball control. Neither one of those things were there for him. And Spencer, I know that you were following this game a little bit more closely than I was. And you're going into this game. Obviously, Aaron Savali is a guy who has that 3 fastball mix that the Brewers like. And as we'll get to later on, he used it a little bit more successfully in his second outing of the week, so to speak, the week for our purposes, the week stretch of time that we're reviewing. But
Yeah.
it sounded like you thought he was a little bit too fastball heavy in this one because remember, he does have the 7-pitch arsenal. Name of the game for him a lot of times is going to be using as much of that arsenal as he has the feel for. You didn't think he quite mixed and matched as well as he and the Brewers could have in this one. What were your thoughts as you were kind of watching this start unfold?
Yeah. So first, I should preface it and say I don't want to become the Twitter account or podcast that is constantly ripping on William Contreras' pitch calling, but I think I have started to do that. So I'm trying not to do that too much. But this was another game where I was getting pretty frustrated with it watching and looking back at some of the numbers. It added up a little bit with what I was seeing too. So it was mostly that 4th inning. It was fine heading into that 4th inning. I thought, as usual, I would probably have been mixing more than he was, but it was reasonable. It was a fine mix going into that. The Brewers had just taken, or they had this nice lead, obviously, At the time, it was 5-1. And it was just heavy fastball early in the inning. And like you said, especially on a night where the fastball command's not good, I just really don't get it, because he was actually landing some of the breaking balls. Like, he was showing a decent ability to command the off-speed pitches, but he wasn't on the fastball. So even beyond everything else we've talked about, where the fastballs are probably worse pitches than, not probably, they're worse pitches for the most part compared to the breaking balls or the off-speed pitches, and you're not commanding them, I just don't get the point of continuously going to it. And he threw one slider to the first, I believe it was 5 batters, and everything else was fastballs. And he walked a couple, and he also had a few pretty hard hit singles, and I believe a double mixed in. He ends up going, Chris Hook makes a mound visit. He comes out of it, and he throws 2 breaking balls to, I believe his last name's Schumann. I don't remember his first. I think it's Max. He throws 2 breaking balls in this at bat. He strikes him out on 4 pitches. Next batter, he goes right back to all fastballs. Lawrence Butler comes up, and it's all fastball. And all of a sudden, Savali shakes and then steps off and then calls his own pitch, and it's a curveball. And he looked to me like he was a little annoyed that he had to do that to get a curveball in. Butler ended up fouling it off, but barely getting a piece of it, and then he got jammed on a fastball for a grounder on a cutter. Those types of things, that's the whole point of the breaking balls, is that it helps the fastball play up a little bit. And I think Savali just wanted to show him something else, like, hey, you're not going to only see fast pitches here, fastballs. He threw one more. He got out of that inning. He limited the damage, but it was one of those innings. He ended up throwing 30-some pitches in that inning. He wasn't able to go out for a 5th, and it just felt like, to me, what was the point of going to the fastball over and over and over, especially when you saw success every time you went to the breaking ball, things went well. So it didn't really make sense to me. It continues to not make a ton of sense to me, but yeah, that was mostly what I saw in that inning. And like I said, the weirdest part to me is that he did have the breaking ball command. There's been other games where I wanted it, but then the point was, and you were right, or other people were right, that like, well, Savali couldn't really throw the breaking balls where he wanted to. That's a fair point sometimes, but in this game, I don't think that was an issue at all. I thought he was spotting him pretty well. So then it just makes even less sense to me. But yeah, I had some people who weren't thrilled with me on Twitter when I tweeted about it. I'm not going to bring attention to it every single time I see it, but when it is that notable to me, and I think it cost them some runs potentially, yeah, I might bring it up again. I think it's important. I think it could matter a lot when you get into a playoff series, and every game is important.
Fortunately for the Brewers, they were able to keep tacking on as this one went on. They broke it open in the 9th with a 4-run inning. Gary Sanchez hitting a bases-clearing triple to drive in 3 of those runs. He was on a pretty nice run early on during these stretches this stretch of games. Even before that as well, he was on a nice little stretch there, getting a little bit more playing time during that run as well. Rhys Hoskins also adding one on with a sac fly. Then out of the bullpen, Brian Hudson, Yoel Payamps, Trevor McGill, and Joe Ross combining for 5 scoreless innings in relief to lead to a win that ended up being fairly easy for the Brewers when all was said and done, and the dust kind of settled at the end there. Game 2, Milwaukee with another high run scoring output, defeating the A's 9-5 in this one. Oakland got on the board first with a first inning solo home run by J.J. Bleday. And then the Brewers, if you want to take the hometown, not bias route, that's a bad word, but like the hometown spin, I guess, or the Milwaukee spin, is that they manufactured 3 runs in the second. But it was kind of a mix of, yes, they worked some counts, but also you have a lot of things kind of going in your favor here. Oakland not executing some plays. So the Brewers putting up 3 runs in the second inning to take the lead. Those 3 runs scored on an RBI ground out, an infield single, and a bases loaded walk. And that bases loaded walk by Jackson Chourio was the second walk in a row issued by Joe Boyle, who was really struggling with his control in this game. That's generally been the bugaboo for him. He's got good stuff, but he's struggled to find the strike zone a lot. And Milwaukee I guess to their credit, they kind of just took what he gave them in that inning. But the whole sequence there, Willie Adames singled, Jake Bauers walked, Rhys Hoskins with what goes down as an infield hit because he hit a line drive single off of Boyle, and then you had the ground out, the infield hit the walk, and then the additional walk with the bases loaded to drive in that run. So take them any way you can get them. And then Jake Bauers with a little bit more of an authoritative RBI moment in the fifth, a 2-run home run for him. That made it 5-1, helped extend the lead a little bit, which ended up being helpful for Colin Ray, who worked into the seventh inning in this one. 8 hits allowed for him in 6 2/3, 4 earned runs, 5 strikeouts, a couple of homers for him. Mentioned the Blade one in the first, and then Brent Rooker hit a 2-run home run in the 6th inning. Jared Koenig then was called on to finish off the 7th inning, and at that point, there were only 3 runs on Ray's line, but Koenig entered in a little bit of a fire. He gave up an RBI double, and that plated a run. Then he intentionally walked Brent Rooker before striking out J.J. Blade, the Brewers getting the lefty matchup that they wanted there. Then the Brewers were able to once again add on late. That was the theme of these first 2 games. Garrett Mitchell hitting an RBI double in the 8th inning. Bryce Terang scoring from third in the 9th on the contact play. It's been a pretty good stretch here for the contact play, a good month of August. We've had a number of occasions where it's worked quite swimmingly, actually, and Terang executed this one really, really well. If you go back and watch that video, the path that he took, the baseline that he established as he was going home, kind of forced a bad throw because he got on the inside side of the baseline, like the inside side toward the mound, and that just makes for a tougher throw from third base because he's kind of blocking off the target a little bit, and it just puts a little bit more pressure on the defense like that with the speed, with the route he took to the plate. So a nice play there. Passed the ball, then scoring another run, and then Rhys Hoskins finishing it off with an RBI single. Bryce Wilson got the final inning in this one, struggled a little bit. It got dicey. Trevor McGill did have to warm up. Devin Williams is unavailable for this game, kind of dealing with a little bit of it sounds like kind of a pinched left shoulder. It just seems like he woke up one day and it didn't feel quite right. So that's something that he kind of battled throughout the week. He's good to go now, and he would get a save in that Giants series, but McGill was going to be the guy in that one. Wilson able to finish it off, though, and strand a few guys on base to secure the series win for the Brewers. Going for the sweep in game 3, they were unable to complete it. And the first note that I have on this one is the CB Buckner game. And you can't put all of the blame on the umpire, because I think even if he calls a better game, that's not enough for the Brewers to win this one. But when you lose a game by 1 and you look at some of the more impactful calls that he made in that 4th inning against Frankie Montas, which is when all 4 of those A's runs scored, we'll get to it. I'm sure most of the people listening remember it anyway. But the Brewers ended up being the ones who scored first in this one. They couldn't hang on, though. Gary Sanchez once again coming up, hitting a 2-run home run in the 2nd inning. And I'll actually start with this Gary at bat, because this is kind of where the CB Buckner game begins. Before Gary Sanchez hit that home run, it was either the pitch before or 2 pitches before. It was a fastball that was well inside that was called for a strike. And okay, you take that pitch. Gary got one over the plate. Shortly thereafter, drove it, no big deal. The problem then is when Frankie Montas gets into a jam in the 4th inning, and instead of not even a similarly wide strike zone, even just a standard strike zone, that's not there all of a sudden. It got smaller than the rule book zone. So Montas gives up 3 straight singles to open the inning, and then a bases loaded walk. And this walk went to a full count. 2 of the called balls were in the strike zone, including ball 4. Ball 4 was egregious. That pitch was fully in the strike zone, at least for ball 2, I believe it was. It was in the zone, but like maybe 2/3 of the ball was in the 3D zone, so to speak. Like that one, I can at least see a little bit, but the final called ball in that one, ball 4, was a rough one, and that just kind of kept snowballing from there. So that plates a run for Oakland, RBI single, a couple sac flies. Next thing you know, Oakland has a 4-2 lead, and then the Brewers putting up their third run on a Willy Adames solo homer in the seventh, falling in this one, though, 4-3. Frankie Montas did a nice job settling down after that inning, and he navigated it pretty well given the circumstances that he was handed. He didn't try to show up Buckner as that inning was going down after a couple of tough calls. So you do give him some credit for that, but you take a series win anytime you can get one. But the way that this game went down was a little rough. And if anyone follows the umpire scorecards page on X/Twitter, I believe the report that came out for that one said that Buckner swung the run probability by about 2 runs in Oakland's favor. And I'm not gonna act like these report cards, so to speak, are hard and fast, perfectly accurate evaluations of the umpire or how the game could have gone if things were a little bit more tight behind the plate. But those were some impactful non-strike calls, no matter how you slice it, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, CB Buckner has been bad forever. He's been terrible. He's basically been Angel Hernandez, but without being as much of a prick. So that's kind of what it boils down to, is that CB's not going to run anybody who argues with him immediately. He's not going to be as pompous as Angel Hernandez was out on the field, but CB is a terrible umpire. He grades out as the worst home plate umpire in baseball this year. He's very bad. And I will say, just on the Gary note, Gary had a bunch of balls while he was at the plate called strikes, and then behind the dish, he wasn't getting anything.
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty impressed that he was able to not get himself ejected in this game and to kind of maintain his composure, because you could tell he was getting really, really annoyed with CB, but he mostly kept his mouth shut, it seemed, which I respect people who can do that, who can control their emotions and can keep themselves in the game. So, yeah, it was, like you said, I don't think you can't just say, oh, well, you take those 2 runs that the umpire gave off the board and the Brewers win. Like, it's not that simple. But I do think there's a pretty good chance you could take 1 run off the board if he just makes the correct calls in that inning. And who knows what happens then. But it's one game. And I will say, Oakland was playing very well after the All-Star break. They had a pretty good record coming into this series after the break. And Brewers could have swept and took 2 of 3 on the road. Obviously not a very hostile environment to play on the road these days, but it's still nice to go out and take 2 of 3 on a West Coast trip.
I will say I was surprised, if anything, by this game that Pat Murphy didn't get tossed, because Murphy was very vocal about the strike zone in St. Louis when Devin Williams was struggling, and that there were really no bad calls against Devin Williams that inning in terms of non-calls. I know the zone had been a little bit wider early in the game, but that was an inning where you had a guy out there who was progressively missing more and more as the inning continued. Like, you can't expect to get calls. He got calls. He got 1 call at least
he
out
got
of
the
the
biggest
strike
one,
zone.
yeah.
A huge one to Goldschmidt in a full count with the bases loaded. And Murphy was barking about the strike zone when Devin couldn't hit his spot, and rightfully was not getting a call on a pitch off the plate.
Yeah.
And he was fired up about it, talked about it after the game even. But then in this one, you didn't really hear a peep from him about it, which I think it's maybe just game situation a little bit. Like, that's the Williams outing is a little bit more of a fiery moment to begin with. It's I know St. Louis is well behind in the standings, but it's division rivalry game, save situation, close game. Like, I can kind of see how the emotions or just the atmosphere of that game kind of gets in there a little bit. But, for a guy who we have not seen be afraid to speak his mind, whether in front of the media or to umpires on this kind of stuff, to not really hear anything from him in this game was surprising, and a little bit funny to me, at least, just kind of based on what we've seen before. But yeah, you take the 2 out of 3 games, and like you said, Oakland had been playing really well going into this series. So again, just keep winning series and you're going to be fine. Speaking of winning series, the Brewers would do that once again when they returned home for a brief 3-game set with the San Francisco Giants. Milwaukee going in opposite order in this one, dropping game 1 and then taking each of the last 2 at home here. So game 1, Giants 5, Brewers 4. This one was a good old-fashioned back-and-forth slugfest. Milwaukee just ending up on the wrong end of this one, really. And I think you can statistically make a case, too, that they hit the ball better than the Giants did. They made
Yeah.
more loud contact. They saw more pitches, applied pressure, a lot of base runners in this one. They saw almost 200 pitches. They had more hard hit balls, more barrels than the Giants did, but you kind of just come out on the wrong end of the sequencing in this one a little bit. Pat Murphy echoed that too post game. He said that he was actually really happy with the effort that he saw from his guys, and I think that's a good perspective to have because it's a long season, and just the way that baseball works, you can win games where you were maybe not the best team that day. You can lose games where maybe you were the slightly better team that day. That's just the way it goes. And I think being able to have that perspective throughout the season, and he's shown it too. It's gone both ways. There have been games where they won, and he comes into post game and he's not happy because he knows it wasn't a great showing, or maybe they kind of squeaked out with one that they shouldn't have, or there was more that they could have done. So I like the perspective he had in this one, but we'll dive into a little bit more of the action specifically here. There were 5 home runs hit in this ball game. Jackson Churio hit a go-ahead 2-run home run in the 3rd inning to put the Brewers on top. Then Matt Chapman hitting a game-tying solo shot off of Tobias Myers in the following half inning. In the 4th, Blake Perkins then in the 5th inning. This was his most impressive home run robbery of the year. The amount of ground that he covered, and then he basically like crashed into the wall almost full speed as he jumped to grab this one. And you're also going up against not just the actual wall, but because that's kind of that indent, so to speak, in left center, kind of the triples alley out there. You've got just the backdrop of the actual stadium too that he crashed into on top of that as he had to secure that ball, and he hung on to it too. They looked at a replay review just to make sure that he hadn't, gotten it with the glove, and as his hand kind of smacked back behind him, that it didn't kind of roll out, catch the actual like backdrop of the stadium or the batter's eye, and then roll back into the glove. He hung on to it. All things considered, I think that out of the 4 home runs we've seen Blake Perkins take away this year, I think this one takes the cake for me.
Oh yeah, that was normally Blake's home run robberies kind of just look nonchalant. We've talked about that. He's very good at that. He just makes it look like it was nothing. And they're all not super easy, but some of them have been like, okay, yeah, he just kind of skipped into the wall and caught it. Like it wasn't a super difficult catch. This one was, as he jumped, you could kind of see the ball on the screen and you could see when he was jumping. And it just looked like there was no way he was going to be able to get to it as it was all happening. And yeah, to catch it, have your glove hit that back wall, not have the ball pop out in that moment, and also not have the ball touch it at all. Like if the ball had even made contact, it didn't matter. It's not like football where if you have control and then it hits the ground, it's not even like baseball in some cases. Like if it touches that back wall, it would have been a homer, and on review, they would have overturned it. But for him to be able to keep it off of that wall, hold on to that, that's one of the better home run robberies I've seen, period, from a Brewer. There's been some very good ones over the years, and I wouldn't put it at the very top, but that's one of the best ones I've seen in a while.
I want to throw something else in here too. This was not talked about at all, really. And I wanted to ask about it after the game, but there was so much else that happened that was kind of a topic of discussion in post game. But Blake, before he made this home run robbing catch, the previous half inning in the bottom of the 4th, he had a really, really smart base running play as well. He was on first base. Sal Frelick hits a ground ball, like a slow roller to third. So Matt Chapman at third base comes charging in. Whatever, throws it across the diamond. Blake realizes that third base is not being covered. It's wide open. So he takes off and he gets to third and takes that extra base. That's just really heads up as well, being able to read the situation and seeing that there's nobody over there and being able to take that extra base when it was basically vacated for you and it's there for the taking. So a couple of really nice plays back to back there for him, even if the second one was the one that kind of stole the headlines a little more. Like little stuff like that too. That stuff deserves to be called out because that's a really smart play on his part.
100%. He's had some base running mistakes over the last couple of years with the Brewers. He's been picked off a few times, all of that, but he's a very smart baseball player. He does a lot of good things on the field. I think that helps with the defense. I think he's just situationally aware of things really well. And he, actually, I don't know if we ever talked about this, but I remember I saw it on Twitter. I hadn't seen it live, but he did an interview with Bally pregame during BP. And he was out in the outfield, mic'd up, talking to, I believe it was Vinny Rotino and Craig Kashan. And they were just asking him kind of what he does when he's out there. And this was an AmFam, so he obviously has a good understanding of the outfield and everything, but it's still a tricky, the alleys and where he made that home run robbery. It's a weird angle. There's a lot of stuff going on. And he just talked about how he's treating fly balls out there like it's a game situation. And he's like, everyone in the outfield knows to move. If I'm going after it out there, he's like, he's taking those reps super seriously to figure out, okay, where's the wall? Where's the warning track? How many steps do I have when I hit the warning track? If I'm shaded to right center, how many steps do I have until, like, he's doing all of this pregame. And I think it's a good lesson, one, for players, of like younger players and younger people who are still learning about like, that's what a major league player does pregame, to learn about these things. But also, I think he's probably going a bit above and beyond what other players do to try and get used to their surroundings in the outfield, especially during pregame. And that shows up in all of the defensive metrics and how good he is out there. I think he's got great instincts, but I also think he prepares differently than a lot of people. And you got to give him a lot of credit for that. I'm sure some of that came from fighting his way through the minors, fighting his way up here, trying to keep a roster spot, all these things. Like, he wants to be ready for any situation. And if you can find that interview out there, watch it. It's a really good look into the mind of like the type of player he is and the type of baseball IQ he has. It was really cool to listen to.
I will say one of the sneaky cool things about getting to be in the spot that I'm at, where I get to be at all these home games, interact with these guys, cover the games, is if you're there early enough, you get to see them put some of this work in, and you get to see. Yeah, obviously, you only get to see the tip of the iceberg just based on what they're working on in BP or early work on the field. You don't get to see anything that goes on in the tunnel, but you still get a glimpse of that, just how much work goes into this and what kind of stuff these guys are working on every single day on the side, so that it is automatic once you get into a game setting. And you always kind of think in the back of your head, like, yeah, the great players have to work hard. You got to work hard to get to this point. But like when you actually start to see that too, I think it starts to hit a little more. It starts to sink in a little more, the reality of it, just how many reps these guys take every single day. These guys are busy before the game. Like, and if you're trying to track some of these guys down to talk to them before the game, that, most of them are great guys and they're easy to talk to, but like they're busy because they're working on all of this stuff. And there's just so much that goes into it that a lot of people and a lot of fans, you don't get to see that. But those of us who are there, we're incredibly privileged because we do get to see that. And I do think it is pretty cool. But Blake definitely falls into that camp. He's a guy who's worked very hard to get to where he's at, and he continues to work very hard. I still go back to when the Brewers made him their first official free agent MLB signing of the 2022 to 23 offseason, and no one really made anything of it. But this is a guy who obviously had the talent, but he also had the work ethic too, and I do think that also plays a role into the kinds of players that the Brewers try to acquire. But he's been, in a lot of ways, kind of right in the middle of a lot of what the Brewers have done really well over the
Yeah.
last couple of years. So it's really cool to see that. But unfortunately, his impressive home run robbery would be immediately followed up by an actual home run. Blake Perkins, unfortunately, not able to rob a Grant McCray second deck home run to right
Nope.
field. So I guess he can't catch everything.
A little
But
more
that
prep
makes it
work, he would have had it.
a little more prep work. He would have had it. Exactly. Needs to line up in the Loge level moving forward. But that makes it 3-2 Giants off of Tobias Myers, who in this game gave the Brewers 5 innings, but allowed the 3 runs, 3 hits. He also had earlier in this game a fairly costly balk against him. Once again, he slipped off the mound as he was beginning his delivery. He said post game, like, we got to get this figured out. It can't keep happening. Remember, it happened to him, I believe, in Chicago
Yep.
when he slipped off the mound. The exact same thing, really. Just the back foot kind of gave out as he was about to start pushing off the rubber. So that ended up being pretty costly because it moved a runner to third with 1 out, and then a ground out scored him, followed by strikeout to end the inning. If he's starting on second base, he likely does not score on those plays. But the 2 home runs for Myers, again, he did have 4 strikeouts. For as good as Tobias Myers has been this year, and I'm not holding this against him because the pace that he was on was incredible. But like these last 4-ish times out, with the exception of he had that one gem mixed in there, the 8-inning start where he was legitimately fantastic.
Right. Yeah.
But there have been a lot of outings now where you can just tell it's not quite the best stuff, not quite the best command. And I think to his credit, he knows his arsenal well enough that he's been able to grind through it a little bit. But this is kind of a stretch now where for the better part of like a month now, he really has not been going out there as the best version of himself. And I kind of think we saw that again today. Pat Murphy said it in post game, like, that wasn't the best version of Tobias that we've seen. The velo wasn't always quite there. Command wasn't always quite there. Made some mistake pitches over the plate that got hit pretty hard. But he did keep the Brewers in this one still, and I think that needs to be highlighted as well. But we're kind of seeing him trend back towards maybe who you would expect him to be more long term, like a capable number 4 starter, perhaps, like capable
Yeah.
mid to back guy, but not, he's not going to continue to be whatever the 1.9 ERA guy that he was for a stretch of like 6-7 starts there. But he's done a really nice job for the Brewers this year still. But we're kind of starting to see things even out a little bit just in terms of the quality of his pitching. So I wouldn't be surprised if the results kind of start to trend down just a little bit. But you still have to give him credit for being able to grind through some of these outings. And there's something to be said for keeping your team in the game pretty
Yeah.
consistently every time out. So, but Spencer, I'm kind of curious if you've seen anything similar, different in this stretch that he's kind of in right now.
No, I'm with you. I think I would just echo the fact that it is impressive, first of all, for a rookie pitcher to be able to get to grind through these outings where he doesn't have his best stuff or command. I think, like you said, he's learned a lot about his stuff this year, and that's put him in a position to be able to get through these situations. I think he is probably more in line with like the guy who did struggle a bit in the minors the last couple of years right now, but he has a better understanding of how to work through his issues. And he was usually he would pitch fine and then he would give up a big inning in most of his outings in the minors. He would have it would be mostly fine. It wasn't like he was giving up 1 and then 2 and then none and then 1 or whatever. Like it was 0 0 0 5 0 4. Like that was the type of outing he would have when he was going out there. So I think he's just learned how to battle through things and use his stuff to get through these innings, whether it's on or not. And he does deserve credit for it, but I do agree that there could be a blow up at some point soon, and it wouldn't be super shocking, just kind of a regression to the mean in terms of the numbers, because he is still doing okay numbers wise on the surface, at least. A lot of the peripherals say he's probably due for something not great at some point.
Most of the peripherals would tell you, and this is what I said when I was on 1250 earlier this week. Most of the peripherals would tell you he's about a 4 ERA guy,
Yep.
not this mid to upper 2s that we've seen for most of the year, which again is still completely fine. Like capable MLB pitcher, he's proven that
100%.
he can stick in an MLB rotation, just not quite at the level that we've seen so far. But I last thing I will say is that for as much nitpicking as there's been from us and from others about William behind the plate. I do think that he works tremendously well with Tobias. Like the way that he
I agree.
approaches things aligns very well with how Tobias needs to do things. And I think he just does a good job of just guiding him from behind the plate, like just guiding him through a game as well when some of these things can start to go south a little bit. So I do think he deserves some credit for that. I think that those are two guys who work very well together. Like, you know, we've criticized William being continuing to be fastball heavy for certain pitchers who maybe shouldn't be as much, but Tobias is going to live off the four seamer
Yep.
and the cutter, playing those two off of each other, establishing it to both sides of the plate. William actually in this game too, there was one at bat, at least one at bat. This is the one I remember though, where it was 3 sliders in a row for a strikeout, and that
Yeah.
was like that's the kind of stuff like I think we'd like to see from him a little more, but that was a good sequence in that one. But just in general too, like I think the Tobias has figured out, especially that the best way to use his arsenal is he didn't do it quite as much in this one, and I think that may have been like matchup based a little bit, but for the most part, during the good run that he was on, he kind of figured out that everything plays off of establishing the fastball to the outside corner.
Yep.
Because the first couple starts, it was high four seamers, curves low, cutters off the high four seamer too, like inside maybe to try to jam guys. But then it changed a little bit. Now it's established the four seamer away to lefties or righties. You can kind of throw a comeback cutter off of that too. And then you can go to the slider off of that against a righty to get the chase then, or you can go with a changeup off of that against a lefty to get the chase. And he and William deserve credit for really figuring that out as well. They did change it up a little bit in this one. It was a lot more high fastball, especially early on. But I'm just inclined to think off the bat that that was based on who they were facing, probably
Yeah.
some information that they had. But all this is a roundabout way to say Tobias Myers really has figured something out this year, but the stuff hasn't been quite as good the last few times out, and you're probably going to start to see things kind of even out a little bit as we move
Yep.
forward here. But that's not really meant to be a slight on him. The Brewers, we're not done in this one. We should probably finish talking about the game. So to get you up to speed again, it's 3-2 Giants at this point. Willie Adames with a pretty dramatic go-ahead 2-run home run in the 6th inning. Nice stand and stare and a bat flip that followed. I love just seeing the atmosphere of that, like being there for that. That was a pretty fun moment. Unfortunately, that would not last either. Yoel Payamps got the 7th inning, and he had been fantastic over the last month or so. But in this game, made a mistake with a low fastball, a low four-seamer, I should say, to Mike Yastrzemski, who hit the go-ahead 2-run home run to settle the score at 5-4, where it would end up. Earlier in the at-bat, Payamps executed a high four-seamer, and he got Yastrzemski to swing and miss at it. But this one, he just missed down, did not miss the pitch, and there you have it. So, but again, on the offensive side, still a good effort for the Brewers. Like I said, they saw almost 200 pitches, drew a lot of walks, put pressure, hit balls hard. Even in that last inning, too, I think they had 2 pretty well-struck fly ball outs. I know Rhys Hoskins had some hard hit outs. Contreras had a hard hit line drive right back up the middle. That was like 114 or something off the bat, straight away center, right into the teeth of the defense. So a little bit unfortunate there. But either way, the Brewers did come back to win the following 2 games. Game 2, they would take by a score of 5-3. They had a 5-run 5th inning in which they put up the entirety of that scoring output. Jackson Chourio, once again, hitting an RBI single. There's not a whole lot more that you can say about him, and yet we will still have more to say about him in Game 3. But RBI single for Chourio in the 5th. Blake Perkins then following with a 2 RBI double. William Contreras then hitting a monster home run. Kind of went Adrian Beltre there, falling to a knee as he hit that one. That one was pretty aesthetically pleasing to watch. It's exciting to see what he's doing now because he's really started to elevate the ball now in the month of
Yep.
August here. For most of his career, he's been right up there at the top of the league in terms of hitting the ball really, really hard, but he would hit it into the ground so often, like constantly running ground ball rates well over 50%. But now we're starting to see him elevate it. And when he elevates it, yeah, he can hit some absolute moonshots. He's got the raw power to be a 40 home run hitter, I fully believe, if he can
Yeah.
elevate the ball. Is he ever going to elevate the ball enough for that to happen? I don't know. Probably not, because that would require a pretty substantial change to his batted ball profile. But the actual raw power that he possesses, he's got that strength in him to do that. So, really exciting to see him at least tap into that a little bit more in the month of August. And to me as well, it's come at just the right time because you don't have Christian Yelich in that lineup. That's a big bat that you're missing in that 3 hole, especially. And Yelich had been hitting for more power again this year. So I don't know about you, Spencer, but I think it's just been really timely that this is when William has really stepped up and started to tap into more of that home run power.
Yeah, 100%. I think him and Churio have kind of been the two that have really picked up the slack for what you would have been hoping to get out of Yelich. Obviously, it'd be great to have all three of them doing what they can do. But I do think timing wise, it couldn't be much better. And I don't disagree with you on the 40 homer thing. I think if he did hit the ball in the air more, I think he'd be capable. Obviously, amount of games played could be kind of tough, even though
Mm-hmm.
Murph might put him out there all 162 behind the plate if people let him. But he has that type of power. I mean, people don't hit 112, 113 mile per hour homers very often, and he's done it multiple times this year. He has huge raw power.
Huge raw power. Freddie Peralta got the ball in this one for the Brewers, did a nice job with the run support that he got after that 5th inning, especially. I guess he worked most of this outing in a tie game. He went 6 in this one, worked most of it in a scoreless game, I should say. And these are like the kind of outings that you like to see from him, especially
Yes.
in that situation too, just holding serve until his team was able to break through. He did walk 3 guys, but only 2 hits allowed, struck out 8, ended his night with a pretty big strikeout of Elliot Ramos in the 6th inning. At that point, the Brewers do have the 5-run lead, but you got a couple guys on base, a big hit there. The direction of the game can kind of start to change a little bit. And Freddie was pretty animated after he got that strikeout. It was good to see the swing and miss back for him after it had
Yes.
been missing for a couple of outings. I know if you ask him after those starts, he would say, "Well, I'm not really trying to strike guys out. I'm trying to pitch the contact a little bit more," which it's all well and good, but the reality has always been no matter what Freddie's intent is, it's swing and miss stuff. And when it's working the best, it's getting swing and miss. Like it's not a weak contact kind of arsenal. So even if he's somehow able to make that work for a couple starts, that's not going to hold up when it's riding four seamer and the slider. Like that's not a profile that's generally going to be conducive to weak contact consistently. So good to see the swing and miss back for him. But these are the kind of outings you'd like to see, right, Spencer? So just good to see him step up in this one.
Extremely. He had his ERA in August, I believe, was like 2.89. I saw today. This was the first start, and I didn't get to watch this start, so I'm going just off of the numbers and what I saw. But this feels like the first start in that stretch where it felt like he was legitimately quite good.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was getting decent results, but I agree with you. I think for him to be at his best, there needs to be strikeout and there needs to be whiff involved. And seeing it come back around where he can get through 6 and have 8 strikeouts, like that's best of both worlds. That's what you want from Freddie. I'm not expecting 7 very often. I would just like him to get through 6 and rack
Mm-hmm.
up some strikeouts, and that's a good Freddie start. Like, give me that as much as possible, and I'll be happy.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like I know we've on this show the entire year we've held him to a very, very high standard.
Yeah.
And we've, been pretty tough on him with evaluating his outings this year. But like that's what you're hoping for, like 6. Like there's a big difference between these starts where it's like 4 or 5 and because he's got so many deep counts and like that's all you're able to get out of him. Like even just that extra inning, like just getting through 6.
Yes.
That is a huge, huge difference. And in today's era of baseball, or just even with the way these Brewers teams are built, and again this year with the bullpen, Like, if your number one is getting through 6, that's fine. It just needs to be those 6, like, if you can count it, like, 6 quality innings almost every time out, like, that's all you hope for. Like, 6 doesn't even have to be 6 shutout like it was that, like, 6 innings 1, 6 innings 2,
Yeah.
occasional 6 and 3, like, this is the kind of stuff you'd like to see, and if Freddie Peralta can really step it up over this final month as well, I don't I don't wanna say the Brewers need him right now because they are sitting in a pretty good spot, but you could also make the case that, if you wanna get a higher seed in the playoffs as well, the Brewers are right in the mix for that, then you do need him to step up, and
Yeah.
once you get into the postseason as well, you need him to step up because he's going to get game 1 for this team, even when he was struggling a little bit. I don't think that was ever really a question. I think he was always going to get game 1, and that's going to be the case, I think, unless he just completely implodes the rest of the way here. But then, like, you need the best version of Freddie Peralta to kind of set the tone. And if you can get him to round into that form a little bit down the stretch here at just the right time, that's definitely what you want to see. So after Freddie's evening was over, the Giants did scratch across a few runs against Trevor McGill and Jared Koenig, but then Devin Williams delivered a perfect ninth inning, picking up the save. So he was warming up in the bullpen in game 1 in case the Brewers came back to tie it. So Pat Murphy then confirming the next day that he was in fact available. He pitched in this one, did a nice job picking up the save in that game. Game 3, the Brewers winning this one a little bit more authoritatively even than game 2. 6-0. Aaron Savali completing 7 innings for the first time this year.
Mhm.
7 scoreless innings for him. Only 2 hits allowed, a couple of walks, 7 Ks, and this to me, like, as I was watching this game, like, this is the mix you're looking to see from Aaron Savali. Like, again, the whole deal with him is his greatest strength is that he has, like, almost every shape covered. Or
Mhm.
not every shape, but, like, at least every, like, every broader variation of how you can make a baseball move. He can make it move, you know, fastball glove side movement with the cutter, fastball arm side movement with the two-seamer, fastball with a little bit of vert with the four-seamer, the 12-6 curve, the sweeper, the short slider now that he's got, like, and the splitter too. He threw a couple splitters in this one as well. Like, he's got everything covered, and we saw every single one of those pitches and the usage when you just kind of break this down. So he threw 92 pitches in this one, 24% cutter, 22% two seamer, 17% curve, 16% four seamer, 13% sweeper. And then he threw 5 splitters and a couple of the shorter sliders. Like, everything was mixed in, and it was changing a little bit too as the order kept turning over.
Yep.
As the order kept turning over, we saw more of the curveball those last few innings to start to keep guys off balance a little more. Like, this is how he's going to get guys out, by just being so unpredictable. And some of it's a little bit of a chicken or the egg thing, because in order to do this, he needs to be landing all of these pitches, and that's
Mhm.
not going to happen every time he's on the mound. But this was one of those days where he had the command of pretty much the full arsenal. And credit to Gary Sanchez, because, like, he called the full arsenal. They kept
Yes.
mixing and matching. They didn't get predictable, and there's a difference in my mind between in that Oakland start. I believe it was he threw like 70% of his pitches were some kind of fastball variation. Like 45%, I think it was like the two seamer or the four seamer. It was almost all two seamer, really. Even in
Yeah.
this one, like, not only was the overall rate of fastballs down, but it was a more even mix of just all the fastball variants too. And that also matters as well, because those aren't the same pitch then. Like, there's at least a little bit of nuance then amongst all those fastballs when you're throwing, but then mixing the curveball. I like that the curveball was a bigger feature today as well. He hasn't thrown it a ton with the Brewers. I actually was hoping we'd see it maybe a little bit more than we have. But, like, just everything about this mix today to me was, like, perfect. Like, everything was working for him, and both he and Sanchez knew it. So
Yeah.
they mixed it, kept guys off balance, got some strikeouts too, got some swing and miss. Like, this is ideally what Aaron Savali's capable of, and on a good day, this is how you want him to pitch, and this is what you want the game plan to look like. So kudos all around to everybody who was involved in this outing and the success that he had on Thursday.
Yeah, agreed. I got nothing to add. You nailed it.
All right. Well, thanks for making me feel good about myself. Another interesting note in this one, Garrett Mitchell homered on a high fastball.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you saw the tweet I put out after he did that. That was only his second box score hit on a big league fastball in the upper third of the zone or above. The first one came about a month ago, and I don't think that should even count because it was a bunt single. So this was, and not like a bunt single is a legitimate way to get on base, but for the purposes of like evaluating your ability to hit a pitch like with a swing, that this is the first real hit that he has had in his big league career on a fastball in the upper third of the zone. And, you know, you can never conclude anything from a single swing. You just can't. So we're not going to do that here. But it's not nothing like when you see a guy do something for the very first time. Like we've talked about how huge of a problem this is for him. And I kind of looked up some numbers after he did it too, just to double check to see where he was at on these kinds of pitches. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'll try to recall them from memory as best I can. Going into that at bat, his whiff rate, so whiffs per swing on four seamers, sinkers, two seams, cutters, like that, the trio of fastballs, his swing and miss rate, like his whiff per swing rates on those pitches in the upper third of the strike zone or higher, was 50% for his career. But so that's like alarming in and of itself. Like no one is great against high velocity. Like those are tough pitches to hit, but it's been far worse for Mitchell than even the rest of the league. Like there's a difference there, and that's what we've been trying to call attention to. So the 50% whiff rate, I think the rest of the league was like somewhere around 25 maybe. But the bigger thing for me was, I believe his rate of balls put in play on those high pitches is also telling as well, because a lot of times if he wasn't swinging and missing, he was like barely fouling it off.
Yep.
His in-play rate, again, don't quote me on it because I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think it was like 12%. It was like somewhere between like 7 to 12%, like somewhere in that range. But I remember being like the league rate was like more than double that. The league rate was over 20%. And Mitchell it was either single digits or 12 at most. Again, I don't have it in front of me, but it was bad. So to see him just even get to one of these pitches and not only get to it, but turn it around.
Yeah.
Like you put a star next to that at bat. And that brings us to our first listener question of the episode. Michael asked us on Twitter, what did Mitchell do differently today versus the high fastball? Is it repeatable? And what does it mean for him going forward the next 4 years? I don't know if we can really answer the second part of that question, but as for what he did differently, I know we talked about this last week. It looked like he had lowered his hands a little bit, just kind of changing his starting point in the box. But to me, like if you go back and watch the video, it looks like there's two things going on. I think number one, he was hunting that pitch to begin with.
Yep.
If you go back and watch the video and kind of see the swing, like it was almost more of I just need to get the bat to this area of the zone type swing. And that's part of it as well. But like in the process of that too, like I think he just executed just the physical motion of getting on top of that ball more.
Mm-hmm.
And he did mention, we talked to him post game about it. He did mention that that's something he's been working on lately. He said, you know, we've kind of realized like a lot of these fastballs that I'm missing, I'm like just under them. So he said, I'm really just trying to work to the top of the ball now to try to overcome that, to try to compensate for having been under it most of the time. And he did that there. And even if it was the product of almost like an exaggerated hunting of that location.
Yeah.
I think just even the fact that, like, no matter just the fact that he, like, executed that kind of swing path even once,
Yep.
like, that's good for him, and that it just kinda gives you, I think that instills a little bit of, it gets the monkey off your back a little bit. I think just for him having experience now, like, yeah, I turned that pitch around, like, I think that can be helpful too. But again, is it repeatable? Does it change anything? Does it change the calculus for him going forward? I have no idea. You don't know after one swing. But still, you put a star next to that and you keep monitoring that, because if he starts to do it a couple more times, then you can be like, okay, we might be onto something here. But at the very least, my takeaway is, yeah, it's something to watch now. Just the fact that he connected on it once for the first time.
Yeah.
So that was my thought on it. I don't know if you had anything different or anything to add on top of that.
No, pretty similarly. I did notice right when he hit it that his first kind of thing he did as he was running down the baseline towards first was to point at the dugout. So
Yep.
my first inclination is, did someone tell him, "Hey, dude, they're gonna throw you a high fastball. Please try to
Mhm.
go get it. Like,
Yeah.
go hit it."
Mhm.
Um, but it also may have been pointing towards the hitting coaches, like, "Hey, that's what we've been working on." So I don't want to say for sure that it was something like that, but it was definitely related to that. I think he was aware of it. Like you said, I think it's a little bit of a monkey off the bat situation now. Um, and also, I do like hearing that he was aware of this and that he at least is now kind of cognizant of it and knows that it's something he needs to get better at, because a lot of the other stuff he's done this year, we talked about it, he has improved in some ways. But once teams really started figuring out that that high fastball was just a complete problem for him, it stopped mattering that he had improved in a lot of other ways, because teams just started peppering him there. And they could do it enough to make it where those improvements weren't enough for him. If he can at least hold his own up there, then there's a real chance of him being decent. I honestly do believe that. But if you can't do anything up there, you're just going to get exposed too much for it to ever get to a point where you're a solid offensive player. That's really, to me, the whole kind of, I mean, that's it for him right now. Like, if he can show that he can get to that and especially turn it around and actually hit it for power sometimes, then teams are going to have to at least be somewhat hesitant to go up there against him, because
Exactly.
they know that he
Mhm.
can turn it around and really crush one.
Right.
So yeah, it was at least good to see. And yeah, it's definitely something to continue monitoring, because he starts doing it a bit more often. And now it's going to change things. It's going to change the whole calculus of every at bat he's got.
Mhm. Yeah, even if he just were to get it to a point of, instead of that being a complete and total, like, hole in his swing, if you can even, like, limit it or diminish it from a hole to, this is my weak spot, like,
Yep.
even just that step, like, it just putting it in the pitcher's head where it's like, okay, it's not automatic that I can get him with this pitch. Like you said, that creates a little bit more hesitancy to go up there, and then that opens up the bottom third of the zone for him, which is where
Yep.
he's really good in the bottom third of the zone. Like, that is the one thing he has consistently done since he's been in the big leagues. If it's in the bottom third of the zone, he hits it hard, especially if you give him a breaking ball in the
Yeah.
bottom third. That plays into his swing really nicely, and that's kind of where we had seen him have some impactful hits in the past. So definitely something to monitor. Again, there's really no takeaway to be had as far as, does this change anything about him? Do we know if anything's changed, like, anything that's going to stick? But at the very least, now you monitor it, because they're, like we've talked about, very, very big. Like, his ability to hit that pitch, or at least get to it sometimes, it really cannot be overstated how massive the implications are there for just his offense in general, because, like you said, it's a ripple effect. It's all connected,
Yeah.
and it's all connected to the kinds of pitches that he's going to be seeing then. And then, does that allow him to just maximize what he's good at a little bit more too, because teams can't exploit that hole as much, because it's not quite as bad as it was when he debuted. But I'm sure we'll get more time to see that as well. So,
Mhm.
but be very interesting to kind of see how things unfold yet. So like I said, right now it doesn't change anything for me, but I'm on alert. I'm on watch. I think we both are. But continuing with the recap of this game. So we mentioned the Mitchell home run. Blake Perkins hit a sac fly in this one. You wrote in the agenda Willy Adames and William Contreras sort of execute a double steal. You want to walk through this one yourself a little bit since you're the one who put that descriptor in there?
Yeah. So, and I will say I actually agreed with trying this in this spot. It was a 2-strike count with 2 outs. I think that's the time you try and break this out to see if you can make something happen, because the hitter can swing in that spot and just do his normal thing. And if not, you try and get in a rundown, which is what Adames did. He was stealing on the pitch. He stopped 3/4 of the way there. No intent of really going to second unless they let him have it, pretty much. They make the throw to second. Willie starts getting in a rundown. They end up, I'll walk through the Contreras part of it in a second too, but like they make the throw to third because William got a third of the way, maybe a little bit more down the line, and he kind of took a fake step towards third. He had no intention of going back to third, but he was trying to get that throw, and he was going to try and beat that throw home, the return throw from Chapman. He was setting it up. You could see it on the replay. He was trying to get that throw at that moment, and then he was going to try and be in Matt Chapman's throwing lane and beat it into home or get hit in the back with the throw or force the throw to be offline because of where he's running. So I thought William ran it absolutely perfectly from his perspective. Like the timing of it and everything he did was perfect. The nice thing is Matt Chapman just straight up dropped the ball on. He tried to make like a spin into a throw, and on the transfer from his glove to his hand, he dropped it. So William didn't have to do hardly anything because he could just walk into home. Willie ended up back at first, which is fine. Either way, he did his job too. He drew the throw and he got himself in a rundown. They actually executed it really well. I shouldn't have said they sort of executed double steal, but the Giants made it so that they really didn't have to do anything because they ended up fumbling the transfer. However, I would also note, I think Chapman fumbled it because he knew it was going to be a close play at the plate. Once he saw Contreras break and saw the throw coming to him and everything, like he could tell he had to be really fast to make the out. It wouldn't have shocked me if William got in there, especially after seeing the replay from like the wide angle. It was going to be pretty close, even if Chapman had made it a clean play. So I do think they executed it really well.
The scoring continuing for the Brewers after that, Jackson Chourio would hit a 2-run double. Just he's been absolutely fantastic for about 3 months now.
Yep.
Where it's just been really, really good. And this double in particular, if I'm remembering correctly, it was on a fastball. But if you go back to the home run that he hit a few nights prior, that was on a changeup that it missed down and in. But still, this, to me especially, just spoke to really the biggest difference for him between the start of the year and where he's been at since. Just the fact that he is almost overnight, he went from being one of the worst non-fastball hitters, especially in the bottom third of the zone in baseball, to now he's the best since then. I mean, he's had a 600, or at least at the time I wrote about it a couple days ago, from the period through the end of May, and then compare that to the period since June 1st, he has had a 606-point turnaround in his slugging percentage against breaking balls, changeups, anything that's not a fastball in the lower third of the zone or below. He was slugging under 200 against those pitches, and then since June, he's slugging over 700. And to me, this is, I think we've talked about it a little bit before, but he's not the only kid who's got just incredible raw tools and raw athleticism. Like, he's definitely already in a more exclusive class, but he's not the only guy who has those. He's in an exclusive class for his physical tools, but he he puts himself in even rarer company because he's got just this adaptability that allows him to tap into those tools in a way that you just do not see from someone who's 20 years old. And we've seen it at every single level, and he's done it at every level while being younger than the competition. Like the ability to flip like he did it here. Like he flipped that switch so abruptly. And to me, if you're an opposing pitcher, this is what makes Jackson Churio terrifying to face.
Yep.
Because do you have any idea how hard it is to prepare to face a hitter who, like, you already know just based on the raw talent, like, this guy can do a lot of damage against me. But then if you always kind of have that thought in the back of your mind, like, okay, well, here's what the scouting report said we could beat him with, but like, we've already seen him completely flip that on its head. Like, the scouting report on him early was just attack him with soft stuff down. If you executed anything soft in the strike zone, in the lower third of the strike zone, you were going to get him out. Now, if you do that, he's going to hammer it. Like, and to me, that should just absolutely terrify pitchers. This thought of this same pitch that was the way to get him out, like 3 months ago, he's now going to hit that ball 450 feet. And like, and you
break a scoreboard panel.
Right, and take out a scoreboard panel, and then but it carries over too, because like, okay, well now the game plan's obviously going to change a little bit now, but like, is it a matter of time until he figures that out too? Like, he's got such quick hands, he's so naturally strong, he's so naturally fast. I don't believe that there is an area of the strike zone that he does not have the physical ability to cover, because his hands are so quick, the bat speed is so quick, it's so effortless too. Like, it's almost like it is like Mike Trout like in the fact where, like, you look at like Trout's heat maps during the prime of his career. If you really executed a like velocity at the very top of the zone, you could get it by him. But again, that's true for almost every guy.
Yep.
Like, I know we talked about it being especially bad for Garrett, but like every guy in general, like if you throw like a 98-mile-an-hour fastball at the very top of the zone, most guys are not going to get to it a good chunk of the time. So in that sense, you can get him with that. But like, other than that, like, he's got the ability, and even like, he's also, if he's looking for that pitch too, he could get to that.
Oh yeah.
But like, he's got the physical capability and the kind of swing that if he's in a good spot, he can get to anything. And then he's got just the head on his shoulders too of being able to adapt as well. And this is what's going to be what separates him, I think, from so many other players, and what's really going to set him up to be a star long term. The fact that he's got that just on top of the raw talent, like the adaptability part of it too, the physical adaptability, the mental adaptability, like, it's just very much a situation of, when he has those traits, like, what realistically are pitchers going to be able to do to hold him down for maybe more than a couple weeks at a time? Like, it's a constant cat and mouse game of adjustments, and there will be moments where pitchers are probably a little bit ahead of him.
Yeah.
That happens to every hitter. But he speeds up that game so much. Like, he speeds up the period where they're going to have to readjust. Like, it happens quicker for him than it does for other guys. And that's what's really a difference maker as well. Like, he's not going to let pitchers are going to be ahead of him at times, like I said, because that's just how pitching works. That's how the cat and mouse game of pitchers and hitters works. But I have a hard time seeing them being ahead of him for as long as they are for a lot of other hitters. He's going to catch up. He's going to adjust. He's going to figure out how to apply those tools and that physical ability to however you're attacking him. And that's, like I said, that's a really scary thought for a pitcher.
Yeah. The more I have watched him coming through the minors, doing everything, like, obviously I paid very close attention to him for the last 3 years, even. It's almost made me think that scouting should involve adaptability and adjustability as like an important tool for players, like something that matters as much as any other tool. because I think we've seen a lot of players, and you said it, it's a separator. I think it's something you can pick up on in the minors if they can make adjustments and how quickly they can do it. And he did it at a different rate than most players, as always the youngest player at that level. Like he is in the majors, he was always the youngest player at that level. And that was always what gave me the most confidence that he was going to be this type of guy. I still didn't think it was happening this year. He's ahead of schedule for even my high expectations and everything I had for him. I never thought we would see what we've seen these last 3 months, maybe in spurts, a couple of weeks he'd have great stretches, but for 3 straight months to be basically the best hitter on the team, and not because everyone else is just terrible, but because he's genuinely performing at an extremely high level. It's been so impressive. I mean, there's not that much more we can say about him. He is legitimately very good right now, and he is 20 years old, and he's the youngest player in baseball. And he's locked up for 9 more seasons after this one. So it's going to be fun.
Another guy who was fun to watch in this one was Aaron Ashby. So it was an all Aaron day on the pitching staff side, holding the Giants to 2 hits. Ashby came out of the bullpen. This is his second outing out of the bullpen since being recalled. And did we talk about Ashby on
We didn't.
last week's episode?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think you had him in your minor league sandbox, but it was funny because like at that time, I had noticed that he was pitching out of the pen and that the results were good and the velo was up and all that. But I was still kind of like, I don't know if we're going to see him again this year.
Right.
I was like, this might just be more about just get him in a good spot in Nashville to finish the year. It's also kind of like, where do you put him right now? There's a little bit of a logjam in the pen, but as we'll talk about more in the injury update section, then Nick Mears hit the injured list. That opens up a spot, and all of a sudden, Ashby's back, and he has looked fantastic in his 2 outings, outside of basically that first walk he issued in Oakland.
Yeah.
Where he missed like 3 straight fastballs, nowhere close. But then since those 3 pitches, basically, he's looked dialed in these 2 outings. So 2 perfect innings for him in this one. 3 strikeouts, 3 groundouts. He definitely benefited from a huge zone those final 2 innings, especially in the 9th, where he picked up back-to-back strikeouts on backdoor curveballs that were a little bit off the outside corner. He was hitting his spot out there. So they were good pitches. I think even if you call those correctly, you can say that's a pretty well located pitch out there.
Yeah.
He threw a couple changeups as well. He threw one especially that was 90 miles an hour, and it was a ton of arm side on it. Just a really good looking pitch. But in this game, he averaged 97 plus miles an hour, almost 98, topped out at 98.9. Like, and to put this into context, this is a guy who, like, in spring training was still throwing like 91.
Yep.
And in his first couple outings where he started for the Brewers, the velo looked better than I was expecting, but it was still more like that 93, occasional 95. And now he's all of a sudden back in shorter stints, and he's throwing as hard as he's ever thrown in these outings now, especially this one today. So really impressive stuff. And like I honestly can't believe how quickly this has flipped. Like you've seen enough from these 2 outings already where you're like, he might actually be a factor for the postseason roster.
Yeah.
Like if he's throwing the ball like this is like, again, back to the guy who I know you and I were both really, really high on.
Yeah.
Thinking like this guy has the stuff to be one of the best left-handed pitchers in baseball. And, maybe at this point it took the relief role to bring that out of him. And maybe that is where he ends up long-term. That's kind of where I'm starting to lean now, just based on the journey that he's had, but just getting it back in any capacity and how, not only how far he's come, but how quickly it turned all of a sudden. Like in post game, Pat Murphy was talking about it, and it was actually kind of funny because it was kind of a typical Murph says the bad part very bluntly and then follows it up with the good part. But he was like, he said in postgame, I don't think this made the air on Bally, but he said it like in postgame when someone asked about Ashby, he was like, he's basically said it's incredible, but he said like you got to spring training and you were watching this guy throw and you were like, oh my God, it looks terrible. Like he basically he said like, oh my God, like he's not anywhere near the strike zone. The delivery looks all messed up. Like there's no consistency there. Like the velocity's not there. But again, it's easier to be blunt about that now because he's turned it around. But Murph just said, credit to him, credit to the training staff, credit to, the pitching coaches down in Nashville and throughout the Brewers development system who worked to get him back to this point. But yeah, again, it's kind of hard to comprehend, but now all of a sudden he's looking like a guy who may actually get important innings for them both down the stretch and maybe even in the playoffs.
Yeah, first of all, it's awesome. Like what he's gone through the last couple of years is brutal for a pitcher to go through. Not just obviously there's pain involved and there's surgery and there's a whole rehab, but mentally for him to be able to come out of what he's put up numbers wise in AAA, and he just kept grinding and grinding this season, and it was not going well for the majority of it. And that velo that he had in spring was holding for a large part of the AAA season as well. It started going up a little bit more midseason, and we saw that second start he made in the majors. He was more like 95-ish in that start, so you saw a little bit more of it there. But going back to last season, he got his first rehab outings. He was sitting like 88 on his fastball in those. He was like clipping 90 miles per hour on a few fastballs. This is the surgery he went through. Any shoulder surgery at this point it's bad. You don't want shoulder surgeries. Like Tommy John, it's not an exact science, but it's pretty close. Like, guys are at least going to get back to a point for the most part, especially at his age, where they're going to be fine. Like they might have some things they go through and it might not be super easy, but they're mostly going to be fine. Shoulder, it can end a career. No doubt about it. And it was not looking good. And for him to just be able to come out of it and get to this point, and the move to the pen seems to have facilitated something else in him. But the guy we've seen his last two outings is one of the best 8 relievers on the staff. That's a guy who pitches in the playoffs or makes the playoff roster if he has this type of stuff and he's throwing it close enough to the zone like he has in these 2 outings. So it's really cool to see. I'm really happy for him. And like you said, this is a guy that we both saw as like potentially the ace after all these 3 guys left in Burns, Woodruff, Freddie, like the guy who could be the best starter on the team. I don't think we're going to see him in a starting role anymore. Unless he can come into spring and somehow show that the stuff can hold over longer outings again. But if he's a really good closer and he's a high leverage closer, and I think before you get to the team options on his extension, it's like 7 point something million is what he maxes out at. Like there's been so much talk about that contract. Even if he was never good again, that wasn't going to kill the Brewers in any way. But if you get solid value out of him as a leverage reliever at some point, that contract still looks good in the end because that's what you're paying for a leverage reliever, if not more for the most part on the open market. So it would be awesome if he falls into that. I'm not going to put too much expectation on him, but seeing these 2 outings, like that's the type of ceiling you could absolutely get, and it could be this season.
The whole Ashby discussion ties kind of nicely into some of the loose ends that we're going to go through. We're going to go through some more listener questions now. First one comes from Michael on Twitter, who asks, what does a Brewers playoff bullpen look like? And how plausible is it, more specifically, that Mizorowski or Yoho fit into that picture? And then he said Ashby has fortunately made that decision more difficult. And yeah, I mean, if Ashby continues to look this good, I don't think we're going to see Mizorowski or Yoho. It just gets even harder now to find a way to pencil those guys in. If you really wanted to, if you want to keep Mears off the playoff roster, maybe you can still make a case and then say, you don't roster Wilson or Ross or both, and then you bring up Mizorowski or Yoho for one of those guys. But man, there's also just the element of why start the clock on any of these guys if you don't have to? If you're already feeling really good about what you got. So it could still go a couple different directions,
Yeah.
but Ashby's definitely a factor now.
Yeah. I think it kind of depends on what Mir's injury ends up being. Like, we kind of have an idea right now, but if it ends up being something that does end up putting him out for the season or something, then I think Miz is absolutely on the table. Right now, I would say Miz is probably more likely than Yoho. One, Miz has been used in higher leverage stuff for the Sounds than Yoho has, which is a little weird to me, but who knows if that's planned or whatever. It might just be they're going this day and it happens to be leverage for Miz and not for Yoho. But also, two, I think Yoho might be reaching a point where he's well past his career innings in college because he was hurt for 3 or 4 years of his career.
Mm-hmm.
And then he only threw like 40 some innings at Indiana his senior season. So I think there's a decent chance they aren't going to want to push him into late October or into October at all. I mean, potentially. And so I think that makes Miz a little bit more likely. He's right around his career high in limit in innings, but they're going to want to push him past that anyway, because that's the progression for a guy like him you'd be making no matter what. So if we see one of them only, I think it's probably Miz. If there's more injuries, I think both are probably on the table, and I would still love to see Yoho. I think he would do very well in the major leagues right away. But yeah, I think Miz is probably the more likely one, and it is going to depend on Mir's and his health, and obviously the health of the rest of the pen. We still have a month of the season; anything could happen there.
Got a couple more questions on the pitching development front related to Chris Hook. So John asked us on Twitter, how worried are you about a team throwing Chris Hook a lot of money? Cubs tried it with Counsell. Why wouldn't you offer a guy like that a huge deal if you're a big market team? Or do you think the pitching lab is more responsible than he is? HC Purdy, in a similar vein, asked, it seems to him the Brewers have a lot of success with the journeyman type guys. How much of that do you think you can attribute to Chris Hook? I'm going to kind of take what the stance that seems to have been the case for almost all of the Brewers coaching staff and front office, and really just all the guys who are part of this thing, in that I think Hook is a very big part of it. But I would be very willing to bet that the next Chris Hook is also somewhere in their minor league pitching development chain. Because remember, that's how Hook started out.
Yep.
It used to be, Derek Johnson was very highly regarded, rightfully so, too. He did help the Brewers kind of overhaul a lot of their pitching development stuff. But again, Hook was always a part of it as well, always seen as a smart guy and who was, kind of able to latch onto a lot of stuff and apply it really well and communicate with guys really well. But yeah, he's a very big part of this, especially with everything that's happening at the big league level. But I do think that the next Chris Hook is also in their system. I think in an ideal world, you don't want him to leave because you would just like to hang on to everybody.
Yeah.
And I will say too, like, it's not. I do think if Hook leaves, even if you have a guy who has, the ability to eventually be as good as Hook is, you're probably not going to see it right away.
Yep.
Because if that guy gets promoted internally, he has to slide into a new role. He's probably working with some guys who he hasn't worked with before. He'd have to maybe establish some new relationships, especially with some of these existing big league guys, as opposed to, some of the younger guys like a Miz or a Yoho when they come up next year. But yeah, I think there would be a little bit of a transition there, and there might be some bumps in the road. You even had that a little bit too in Hook's first season. I don't know how
Yep.
much that had to do with him, but remember, his first year as the pitching coach was one of the worst pitching seasons that the Brewers had. in this, what are we on now? Like 8 years of being really
Yep.
competitive. Like that was one of their worst seasons on the mound that year. And that was his first year. That was that transition year. So yeah, I think what really makes him valuable right now is just the fact that he's so plugged in. Like he's so ingrained. Like I do think he's right at the middle of all this. He's far from the only guy who's contributing to it, but my sense is he is kind of like the centerpiece. He's where a lot of, and I'm partially just speculating here, but I think he's kind of where all of the roads kind of run through him a little bit, in the sense
Yep.
of he's taking information from, front office guys, from other coaches. Walker McKinven is a big part of this as well. He works with them a lot, but and they work with the catchers, like they have meetings and all this stuff to go over all this information. I do think Hook is kind of like the guy who's right in the middle of all of it, of knowing how to communicate with each guy, knowing what messaging to give to each guy, how to adapt information. Like I do think he's a very big part of that. And what really makes him valuable right now is not just his knowledge, but just the fact that he's so plugged in right now, and he's got such a good, firm, steady relationship with a lot of these guys. And even like when I've talked to him about some specific pitchers, he does come back to, like I've talked to him about Code Red, Colin Ray. I've talked to him about Freddie, and he said about those guys, like, I've been working with these guys for several years now, and that's what's really nice. He's like, we're so plugged in with each other right now
Yeah.
that, like, it's just so easy to fix anything when something's going wrong. We both have complete trust in each other. We know each other really well. Like that right now, I think, is what makes him the most valuable. And there's an element of, like, if he goes to another team, he has to redevelop all of those ties.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's got the ability to do it anywhere he goes. I fully believe that. Like Chris is tremendous at his job. Everyone will tell you he's tremendous at his job. But like the situation that he has right now, specifically with the Brewers, I do think it's a mix of he's really good at his job, but also he's been here long enough. I mean, just even in addition to being with the big league team, his work on the minor league side, like he's been here for a long time. He's so plugged into everything about how the Brewers develop pitching. So again, like I do think long term, if they really needed to replace him, I think they could. But really where it would get hairy would be just trying to build a guy up into someone who has as many ties as Hook does at this point, who has as much experience as Hook does at this point, who has the relationships that Hook does right now. That's what would be tricky to replace. Like I think over time you could develop that back based on a lot of the other bright minds you have in the organization. But like that's the part of it that takes time to build up. And from, Hook's perspective as well, I have no idea what he would think if he would be offered to go somewhere else, but you never know. Like maybe that could be a factor for him too. Like, does he want the challenge of building something up somewhere else? Or does he like being in a spot where he knows all these guys so well and he's
Yeah.
so right in the middle of all of it? Like you never know. It depends on the guy. But that's kind of the way that I see all of this.
Yeah. I mean, I had a lot of points I was ready to hit, and you hit almost all of them. So I
Ah,
don't have much to add, but no, I think the Brewers were pretty comfortable going to Hook in 2019 because he was often credited with the Burns, Peralta, Woodruff, like being a huge part of their development in the minors. And all of those guys were joining the rotation full time in 2019. Like he already he was familiar with guys who were going to be in the major league rotation at that point. I think the Brewers aren't going to be in that same situation in like the next year or two, very likely. So where I agree, I think the odds of them having someone who's very good and probably multiple in their minor league organization right now, or even in the major, like Jim Henderson might be that guy, the next guy, if you wanted to go that route, is probably pretty high. But I do think it would not be a seamless transition. So you might have a year or two where it's not perfect and there's some differences in how they do things and everything doesn't really mesh immediately like there was with Hook. Like you said, 2019, if Brewer fans remember, there were a lot of people who thought we made a huge mistake letting Derek Johnson walk. And like Jack said, Johnson's fantastic at his job. He's a great pitching mind, too. But there were a lot of people who were like, oh, Chris Hook is not the guy. I mean, Corbin Burns had that awful year, obviously, and it was all just, there was a lot of heat on him immediately. And now it's pretty clear that they did make a good decision and that Chris Hook is probably wanted by almost every organization in baseball at the moment. But I do think, I'm not going to say too much more, but I do agree that from his perspective, there's probably plenty of reason to want to stay here beyond any, financial reasons, that it makes his life a lot easier in terms of he's already comfortable. He's already knows a lot of the guys. He's got a lot of things going for him here. So who knows what he makes? You would have said the same thing about Craig Counsell 12 months ago. But yeah, the Brewers would be fine, but it would probably take a little bit of time for them to get to this point again.
Yeah. I guess as far as the original question of how worried are you about a team offering him a lot of money?
Not super.
I mean, I think there's a chance that there are a lot of teams who would be lining up to snatch him up if he was ever seriously available. I think it would really just be a ball's in his court kind of situation, and you never know what someone's thinking. But I know you mentioned Craig. Hook has been, like I said, he's been in the organization for a long, long time now, and at so many different levels.
Yeah.
Like I would argue in a lot of ways he's, based on like the amount of stops he's had along the way, and with how much time he spent on the minor league side, I think you can very easily make a case he's even more like plugged in,
ingrained
heartbeat of this development system even more than Craig ever was.
Yeah.
So, you never know how that can, kind of influence that. He's older than Craig as well. Like just in terms of career experience, where he's at in his coaching career. So you never know. This is all speculative, but I guess the bottom line is like, I'm sure it's something that is other teams trying to lure him away from Milwaukee. If it hasn't happened already, I'm sure it's going to be a reality at some point. But again, ball's in his court. Who knows where he would wanna take his career. He's very smart, very accomplished, definitely earned the right to do whatever he wants, the rest of the way here, depending on how things go for him or what his contract situation looks like. But if the Brewers are in a position where they needed to replace him, like we've said, I think they can do it long term. Might be a little bumpy at the onset, but I think they can do it long term. Like they have a lot of guys up and down this whole system that have really done a nice job. I know Patrick McGuff is a guy who I've heard mentioned before. JB Bukauskas, credited him. He's in part of their pitching coach team in Nashville. Bukauskas credited him for really being the guy who helped him develop that really good sinker and get it to where it was at before he got hurt. So like you have guys up and down the system who I definitely think could step into it. Just a matter of kind of how that transition would go at the onset. But yeah, I think we covered that pretty thoroughly. We'll move on to a couple more questions here. We'll take one from Steven, who asks us about Sal Frelick. And we'll take this one because I don't think we've actually really talked a lot about Sal Frelick on the show this year. So he asked, does Sal Frelick fit into the long-term plans for the Brewers? Feels like if he's just the fourth outfielder, that doesn't really have much value to the Brewers, considering how perfect Blake Perkins is for that role. I really think a lot of it kind of comes down to how much more power do you think Sal can develop, or how much more do you think is in there in terms of his ability to at least make some loud contact? He's never going to be a guy who lives off of that, but you can't have just the worst quality of contact metrics across the board among qualified hitters in baseball, which he does. I looked it up last week. He at that time he was last in hard hit rate. I think he was last in exit velocity, last in barrel rate, like last in everything. And again, he's never going to shine in those areas because for him it's all about the good plate discipline and then, just hopefully hitting enough medium hit line drives to the point where he's getting on base. But he's got to hit the ball harder than he is right now, because if he doesn't, he's more likely to trend down than up.
Yeah.
From where he's at right now if he can't impact the ball at least a little bit more. And I do wonder, with that said, if you're the Brewers and you don't think that he's going to improve in that area, do you think about dealing him before the numbers drop off even more? Maybe you do. But if you think that he can still grow into it a little bit more, or at least get to a point where he catches the ball in a good spot out in front a little bit more that he's driving it, because I really think that that's what a big part of it is about too. Like, not so much that he's going to magically bulk up to the point where he's suddenly popping more balls, but like just get everything into a really good spot where he's got a
Yeah.
better contact point. Like we saw Bryce Terang do that, especially in the first half, where he was sometimes driving the ball a little more just by getting it in a good spot because the mechanics and the swing path were in such a good position. It's kind of a similar mold for Sal. But if you think he's got that in him, I think that he's still very much a big piece because the defense does give him a fairly solid floor just as a guy who can stick in the big leagues. Like I think he leads right fielders in defensive runs saved. Like he's
He's
been
up
really
there
good
for
out
sure.
there. Like he's sitting like wins above replacement says he's a fine player this year, nothing great. But I believe he's going to finish the year with above 2 wins above replacement, which is kind of like right on par with like a standard, everyday player, not great. So it really just depends to me, I think, on is there more hard contact in there? Like just a little bit more than what we're getting so far.
Yeah. For me, it's hard because I saw him impact the ball more watching him in AAA, especially when he first got to AAA in 2022. I don't really understand what's happened where he just stopped. And like we saw exit velos of like 108 and 109 a couple times when he first got to AAA. And then last year it didn't go very well. He was battling the thumb injury pretty early on at AAA. So I attributed a lot of that to the thumb. This year it has not been there in the majors. You haven't seen it much at all. It's the difference. I mean, we talked about for Garrett that high fastball is the difference. I think for Sal, it's the difference for him. You got to impact the ball a little bit, enough to be gap to gap doubles. That's really all triples with his speed and stuff too. Like you don't need too many homers. You can poke one out to the beer pen or whatever it's called in AmFam once in a while, or sneak one into the bullpen out there. But you don't need to hit a bunch of homers. But there's got to be some line drive gap to gap power, or it's just not enough offensively. So yeah, I think trade wise, I still think him and Garrett are very much in the right deal. The team would probably move either of them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I do agree with the premise that of all of them, I do think Perkins might be the best fit for fourth outfielder as a switch hitter, as somebody who can play all three defensive spots extremely well. Like if you only have four outfielders and you're picking the backup of all of them, I do think Blake's probably the one I would pick out of that group. I think they'll usually carry five, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, he's getting to that point now where it's been over a year in the majors. You got to start showing me something a little bit more than what you've shown, or it's just not going to be there. So yeah, I'm very curious to see how this
Mm-hmm.
offseason goes. I think both of them. It wouldn't shock me if both of them moved and they decided to add an outfielder externally as their third main guy. Like I think they'll explore every option for that spot going into next year.
We're starting to run a little bit lengthy on time here, so I won't go into this too much, but I do want to throw it out here. This is something that I've kind of been tossing around over the last week. I wonder if for a guy like Sal, and granted, if this goes against like what you observe from him in the minor leagues, like you can stop me. But I wonder if for a guy like that, the difference between just the caliber of stuff you're facing in the minor leagues versus the big leagues, like if that ball in the big leagues is getting on him just a little bit quicker
Yeah.
to the point where the bat head's not quite out as in front as he was catching it in the minor leagues. I just pulled up his batted ball data at Fangraphs. He pulled the ball quite a bit more in the minor leagues than he is in the big leagues so far.
Yeah.
So like the difference between, if the minor league stuff, which isn't quite as good, isn't getting on you as quick, and you're able to catch that at a good point, like at the front of the plate, and you're getting the barrel to it, even if the bat speed isn't great. A lot of times in pro, like against professional quality stuff, if you can just make contact at a good point, the pitch itself is already creating some of the power for you. So even if he's not super strong, he might be able to get into some hard knocks in the minor leagues. And then if you get up here and instead, that if that ball's getting on you just a little bit
Yeah.
quicker and he's catching it a little bit deeper, all of a sudden that goes away pretty quickly. And it has nothing to do with strength or bat path or anything. It's just this slight difference in how
Yeah.
big league stuff is getting on him compared to triple A stuff. That's kind of what my
No,
educated
I
guess
think
is
that
right
could
now. I
very
haven't
well.
looked into it a ton, but like that's kind of what I'm wondering if it is could be going on with him right now.
That would not shock me at all. That would make some sense for sure.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if he can. It'd be nice if he could impact the baseball a little bit more because like it's a good starting point. Like the plate
Mhm.
discipline's good.
It
He's a
is.
scrappy player. Like he's got the speed. He's got the defense. Like, and I did like him as a prospect. I liked him more, especially floor wise, than like Mitchell or Weimer. Like
Yeah.
I want to see him do well, but we got to see a little bit more than what we've seen so far. Now, instead of talking about former prospects in the big leagues, we can talk about current prospects. It is time for Spencer's minor league sandbox. Spencer, I won't give you too much of an introduction. I'll just let you take it away.
Sounds great. All right, we got one question on this end. We got Oyster Analytics, who, by the way, cool Twitter account. They have like their own thing going on with the formula to try and kind of predict prospects' futures. It's very cool. Check it out. But they asked, what do you think of Yadier Arenamo? We've always been high on him, and he's been so solid in 24, but he's small and he has no power. Do you think he has MLB, or do you think he's MLB material? I like Arenamo. His load, he moves his hand around in like a big circle. I don't know if anyone remembers like Micah Velas. It's kind of like that, but that scares me a bit. I have a feeling it's going to be hard for him to get into the right position consistently, but the results have been really good, and he has shown a little bit of power this year. He's got 9 homers, 29 doubles. I don't know exit velo data or anything this year, but I've seen some pretty hard hit balls, including in person. I will say on the defensive end, Fangraphs gave him like a 35 current grade and a 40 future. I don't agree with that even a little. I would grade him as at least an above average and potentially a plus defender, especially if he's at second base. I think he could play a utility role or probably more second and third. Second's probably his best defensive spot, but I think there's a chance he's a major league player. I don't know that I'm super confident in him. Some people are higher on him than I am, but he's very interesting. Moving on to our performances, I'm going to try and go somewhat quick through these because we are going pretty long here. So Ryan Burchard, he came off the IL. He had been dealing with an oblique injury. He pitched a couple times for Carolina. He got moved to high A. He's thrown 15 innings total this season. He was a 6th-round pick last year out of a junior college, shocker, pitcher from a JUCO. In those 15 innings, he has a 43% whiff rate between the two levels. At high A, it's 38%, which is obviously lower, but it's still very good. He's sitting around 93 to 94. He's been up to 96. His fastball has had up to 20 inches of induced vertical break, which is very good. It's a really big curveball and a very high spin slider that shows some pretty good flashes as well. I've noticed a couple changeups in his Wisconsin outings. He's very interesting to me. I have him in my top 30 personally. Chase Costello, somebody I've never talked about on here, but he was signed out of the Pioneer League, which is an indie ball league, before the 2023 season. His ERA is 3.92, but his FIP is 2.6. He's got a 32.4% strikeout rate and an 8.5% walk rate, and his whiff rate is 35.8% overall. He's got a nasty changeup, really, really good pitch. His fastball, I've seen up to 96. It's got some pretty nice ride on it. Gets a little bit of run as well, at least to my eye. And he also mixes in a decent breaking ball once in a while, but it's mostly fastball changeup. Another pitcher, Dikembe Sanchez, 20 years old. He started the season in the ACL. He moved to Carolina. He had really good results there, and now he's already in high A. He hasn't pitched for the Tigers yet, but he just got moved up there. He throws a cutter as his main fastball. It's like 92 to 93 with quite a bit of movement. He's got a mid-80s slider. That's a really solid secondary. He throws a slower curveball as well. That's more to land for strikes. And then he will mix in an upper 80s changeup at times that definitely needs some work. But in his 32 and 2/3 innings at Carolina, he had a 1.38 ERA, 22.5 strikeout rate, which is fine, but not incredible. 8.5% walk rate. But he did have a 31% whiff rate, which points to a guy who has the capability to get some swing and miss, and a 62% ground ball rate, which is a great combo to see the whiff and the ground ball. He's very interesting to me, a 20-year-old already in high A. On the offensive side, Hedbert Perez had another really strong week. We talked about him last time. He is now in his second week coming off of ACL surgery at high A. He hit his second homer. Through his first 46 plate appearances, he has a 142 WRC plus. His 26% strikeout rate, pretty reasonable for a guy who's had some strikeout concerns. And a 10.6% walk rate, which is higher than it's ever been in the minors, which is really good to see. His whiff rate's 30%, which is still a bit high for my liking, but we're gonna monitor that. Either way, he's showing the tools that made him a guy who was very exciting a couple of years ago. One name I don't think I've talked about, Luis Castillo, not the Mariners pitcher, but a outfielder. Probably should be talking about him a little bit more. I had heard some good things about him 2 off seasons ago coming out of the Complex League. He's only 20 right now. He'll be 21 in a couple of months, but he didn't do great at Carolina. He still posted some nice exit velos, really high ground ball rate, and some strikeout concerns, and also a lot of injuries last year. This year at low A, he's got 18 home runs, 114 WRC plus, 23% whiff rate, which is decent, 24% strikeout rate. Again, not too bad, with a 12.6% walk rate, which is really solid. He hits the ball extremely hard. We've seen some like 110 exit velos from a 20-year-old. He needed to start elevating more, and he has done that this year. And he's definitely one to watch. He's a decent enough corner outfielder with some pretty big pop. And again, only 20 years old. Lamar Sparks, I've mentioned him before. He's an indie ball signing a couple years ago, rare position player indie ball. Slow start, but since June, he has a 152 WRC plus for Biloxi. He plays really good outfield defense, has a cannon of an arm. To me, the best arm in the Brewers system in the outfield. The whiff rate's pretty high at 31%, and the strikeout rate is 28%, but he's showing that power, and he kind of reminds me of Blake Perkins, honestly. I don't think he could play center like Blake Perkins does, but all the tools, showing some improvement as a hitter in like the age 25, 26 season. He was a pretty early pick back in the day. He was a pretty big prospect for the Orioles, and then he ended up getting cut a few years or right after COVID pretty much, and that's how he ended up here. Last name is Marco Dingus. He was the 4th round pick this year out of Florida State. First 32 plate appearances, he's got a 103 WRC plus with Carolina. It's only a 665 OPS, but he has a couple doubles. He's hit the ball at least 108 miles per hour 4 times already, if not more. I've only seen it happen 4 times and heard it. He has 2 opposite field hits at least that type of exit velo, including one at 110. There's really big pop, and there's pop to all fields. I saw him catch once. This is something they're trying. It's definitely a work in progress, but he's very, very athletic for a catcher. The receiving definitely needs work. He's not used to catching guys throwing in the mid-90s. He hasn't caught since his JUCO days, but of all the guys they're trying this with, I do think he might be the one I'm most confident could figure it out and stick back there. Couple of minor league injuries to close it off. Brett Witrowski, we've talked about him a lot this year. He went on the 7-day IL for Biloxi. I saw somebody post on Twitter that he was in Arizona. I'm wondering, just speculating, that it might just be he hit his innings limit. He's well past what he did in the minors or in college last year and at any point in his career. So I wonder if that's just what it is. They just shut him down. Blake Burke, the Brewers' 2nd pick in this year's draft, is on Wisconsin's 7-day IL. No news on what that is, but it's retroactive. I think he might be back pretty soon. They put it back a couple days when they placed him on it. So, and lastly, the Brewers' 2nd pick from 2 drafts ago, Josh Noth, was also placed on the 7-day IL for Carolina. Also a decent chance of that being more of a limiting innings sort of situation than anything else. But we'll let Jack take it back for the injuries and the major league injuries and the Red Series preview quick.
So we mentioned earlier in the program that Nick Mears is on the injured list with a right forearm strain. Last we heard from Pat Murphy earlier on the homestand was rough timeline is mid-September for him. So depending on how things go, could be a potential crunch time-wise if we're going to see him again this year pitching for the Brewers. Hobie Milner, who has been on the injured list with a shoulder impingement, he's expecting to begin a rehab assignment on Friday with High A, Wisconsin. If that goes well, he would pitch again on Sunday. Brandon Woodruff, for the first time since his shoulder surgery last October, is throwing off a mound. Doesn't change anything about the timeline. He's not going to pitch this year. He will not pitch in the playoffs. He's always been ruled out for the year because he had a long recovery ahead of him. Still very long ways to go, but this is a step. So be interesting to see what the Brewers can get from Brandon Woodruff next season when they're hoping he's ready to return to game action. Good to see him getting on a mound, though, before the end of regulation in 2024. And Oli Paredes had been transferred back to High A, Wisconsin. He pitched for the Timber Rattlers and then was back in Milwaukee for a few days on the homestand. He's eligible to come off of the 60-day IL on September 1st, but sounds like we're not going to see him back then. He still has a little bit of a ways to go in his rehab, according to Pat Murphy. So another guy who's trying to work his way back. We'll see if he's able to get back into a big league game for the Brewers this year. We'll wrap things up by previewing a 4-game series with the Reds in 3 days. Brewers are going to play a doubleheader on Friday. So if you're listening to this, there's a chance they're already playing right now or have already played, because game 1 is going to be at 11:40 a.m. Central Time in Cincinnati. Colin Ray is going to be on the bump. He'll be pitching against Nick Martinez, a repeat matchup for the Brewers against Martinez, who I really wanted them to sign in the offseason. I still think he would have been a tremendous fit for this run prevention unit in a couple of different ways. Game 2, TBD. Brewers have not announced a starter for that game. We'll see if they go to the well for a call up for that one. As a reminder, you can call up a 27th man for a doubleheader. We'll see if that's what the Brewers opt to do. Rhett Lauder is going to be starting for the Reds. That's a 5:40 start for the second game of Friday's doubleheader. Saturday, Frankie Montas is going to get the ball. Sunday, Tobias Myers will be back on the bump. Reds have not announced opposing starters for those 2 games. Saturday is going to be a 6:15 p.m. first pitch. Sunday, an 11:10 start time for the getaway day. We'll be back with you next Friday to recap all of the action from that series and more. Spencer, remember when we said this was going to be a 90-minute episode? It was not.
We're not good at math.
Or just understanding our own ability to limit our baseball conversation. Yeah. But if you made it this entire way, thank you for listening to all of that. Hopefully everyone enjoyed it. We'll talk to you again at the same time next week. Until then, go Brewers.